The lessons today talk about humility and humbleness and being humble, and I suppose the point of them is rather obvious. So what can I say to make it more clear than the message that has been so clearly said? When you're in the presence of a king or a noble person, humble yourself. When you attend a party, don't assume that you're the most important invited guest. And so if I say to you that the message today is don't puff yourself up and don't inflate yourself and don't talk yourself up, that would be it. I could stop right there. The problem is, of course, we spend a lot of our time puffing ourselves up and inflating ourselves, and no one wants to be told that, right? No one wants the preacher to come along with the pin and pop your balloon. But I guess I have to do that, right? That's part of the job. I read a couple of examples of puffing ourselves up in this past week. One was the multiplication of titles and highly paid posts at universities in England. One title that commands a £100,000 a year salary is the Chief Social Purpose Officer. And you might think the chief social purpose officer was sort of like the cruise director, the one who's responsible for organizing shuffleboard and bingo matches and maybe a beer pong game. But no, the chief social purpose officer is the one who sits horizontally across teams to help the university build a coherent social purpose. It takes in all of the operational stuff. That was actually the word in the job description, the operational stuff of how we live. Reforms to the curriculum so that sustainability is embedded in our teaching practice, while also talking about how we use our research. So you can imagine what it might be like to be an English teacher and have to answer to the chief social purpose officer. Edward Gibbon, I was reading Decline and Fall. Anyone ever read Decline and Fall? Yeah, you've read it, right? No, I've read about 10 pages of it. But the 10 pages I've read happened upon this passage. He was blaming the decline of the Roman Empire in part when he wasn't blaming the Christians. He was blaming the decline of the Roman Empire in part on the multiplication of titles. And he talked about the loss of Roman simplicity that had made the city great. Simplicity. Humbleness that might hide a strength, a courage that the old Romans certainly had. But as by the time of the Caesars, particularly by the time of the late Caesars, if you were in any way connected with the government, you were given a title. Peter the Great did the same thing in Russia after his reforms. Anybody attached to the Tsar had a title. And you had people competing with, I'm the chief supreme social purpose dog catcher, and that kind of thing. So these texts are speaking to that. They're speaking to our tendency to puff ourselves up. They're speaking to the Roman bureaucrats and the czarist bureaucrats of old, and they're speaking to the university administrators of today, and they're speaking to preachers, and they're speaking to parishioners. And they're saying, be humble before prince and pauper alike. Proverbs is a manual for court etiquette. It was given to boys entering the Hebrew court, the court of the king, as a way to behave, as a way to comport themselves as members of the extended royal household. And so, like many boys who simply just think about themselves, when food is put in front of them, you might expect them to run to the table and start eating. And this manual is saying, don't do that. Don't make a fool of yourself. Take a look around and see who else is in the room. Go to the lower place first. Luke is similarly offering us a manual for church etiquette in today's gospel, how to behave in the household of God. And what he's saying, what Jesus is saying is echoing Proverbs, go and sit in the lowest place, humble yourself. And of course, spiritually, this can mean know yourself to be a sinner, know yourself to be morally weak, know yourself to be weak, and begin to understand how much you need Christ. So far, he's basically just reiterated Proverbs and applied it to the church, but then he gives another set of household instructions. Then he gives another set of etiquette and behavior rules for the members of the church. He goes on and he builds on what Proverbs says, and he inverts what Proverbs says. He says, when you give a feast, invite the poor, the maimed, the lame, and the blind. In other words, you who can hold a feast, you nobles, you princes, humble yourself in front of the paupers. Humble yourself in front of the poor and the lame and the maimed. And isn't that Christian ministry? Isn't that what outreach and ministry is meant to be? In a nutshell, right? Isn't that a description of what we as the covenant household of God are called to be? As members of the house of God, we're assigned a new set of family obligations to each other, to the members of this household. And who are these members? Well, they're not necessarily our blood brothers and sisters. They're not necessarily our kinsmen, our extended family by blood. They're not even necessarily our neighbors. They are, again, the poor, the maimed, the lame, and the blind. And what this is saying is a truth that I think the church throughout her 2,000 years journey has at her best upheld. At our best, we have set aside family and race and the communities in which we are born and given priority to the household of God. If you really lay out the text, it's saying that three things that keep us good members of the church are the three things that many of us view as most important in life. I'm sorry, the three things that would keep us from being good members of the church are three things that many of us think are the most important things in life. Family, right? What is more important than family? I got a Christmas card last year that basically said in Spanish, Christmas is family, right? Many of us think our race or our tribe or our ethnic identity is determinative, is important. And then community, which a lot of churches will form along the lines of community. A family church is defined as a church that is for a handful of families. A church may define itself along ethnic lines, a Polish church, a Russian church, a white church, a black church, or even as a community church. And these don't seem like they should be bad things. And I don't think they are bad things, but why is Jesus degrading or putting them in a secondary status here? Why does he seem to disregard them? Because they're important to each of us, family, our identities, and our communities. Well, family is our origin. It's our first start in life. And the power of our family casts a long shadow. Our last names determine forever who we are. Jesus is asking us to think that through. Does your family determine who you are and who you must be? Because maybe it shouldn't. Kin, race, and tribe, which is an extension of the family. We've all heard the expression, blood is thicker than water. And Jesus is challenging us to think that one through too. Is your blood thicker than the water with which I will wash you? Jesus is asking. The water with which you are baptized. And finally, community, which I put in air quotes, because other than proximity, what is the common unity about a community? Is the same building or a zip code what unites us? I think Jesus is asking us to rethink that too. What Jesus is asking us to do is to say that none of these three things, family, kin, or community, can be who we ultimately are. They may inform a great deal about us. They may set the parameters of our lives, but they can't determine who we are. They can't be our point of origin. And Jesus gives us a new point of origin. Now, Jesus understands the power of blood, which is why he offers his own blood for us. And that blood, which is symbolized by the water of baptism, creates a new covenant, a new family of origin, a new name for us, Christian. My last name may be Dell, but it should be Christian, right? Jacob Christian. That's my name now. So our old families of origin, our old ethnic and national identities, what do we do with them? Well, they don't need to be destroyed. They're not discarded, but they need to be redeemed. They don't need to be destroyed because God creates families, and he creates nations, and he loves them. But they do need to be redeemed. They need to be redeemed from their sins. And families have collective sins, and kins and tribes and nations have collective sins. They bear collective sins. They also bear the sins of each individual. So both need to be redeemed. The individual and the whole need to be redeemed. I think that's a message that people urgently need to hear right now, but no one's proclaiming it, and even the church is somewhat quiet. Without Christ, we are doomed to extinction. families and tribes and even entire nations die out. You can read the table of nations in the Bible. How many of them are still around? Jebusites, Amalekites, Scythians. Who are these people? Where did they go? History without the cross is one long march towards death. But history with the cross is a triumphant procession through death to eternal life. And so what is God asking us to do? What does Jesus ask us to do knowing that we're on a procession? As the hymn we just sang talked about, ever singing, march we onward, victors in the midst of strife, joyful music leads us sunward. What are we to do with that? Well, he tells us, Jesus. He says, when you give a feast, invite the poor, the maimed, the lamed, the blind, and you will be blessed, because they cannot repay you. You will be repaid at the resurrection of the just. Now, who are the poor, the maimed, the lame, and the blind? Well, literally, they are poor people. They are people who have been maimed, people who can't walk, people who can't see. But I think the larger frame here is that these are all the victims of history. And just as today we cannot repay the victims of crimes committed long ago any more than the poor can repay us, we can be blessed. We can be blessed if we tend to the still open and festering wounds, not of the past, but of the present. And we do it not to atone, because Christ has made complete and perfect atonement. We do it to imitate. We do it to imitate Christ in love. And what does it take to do that? Well, everything that these readings have told us. It takes humility to do it. It takes humility, and it also takes hope. It takes hope that one day the words that we hear Jesus speaking in today's gospel will be addressed to us. So I want to close with them, and I want you to hear them, because I pray that these words are spoken over me and spoken to you too. Friend, he says to every one of us, go up higher. Amen.